welcome to another installment of the IOD's 859 Club, although it's now the 259 Club. We're planned to finish at 2:59 today. We have a very distinguished panel, and before I introduce them, I just want to let everyone know that we have two Chartered Director modules coming up next month. There is a strategy course, which I believe starts on the 11th of November. And a week later, there's the leadership module. So anyone who's on this call and interested in either of those two Chartered Director certificate modules, please get in touch with our secretariat and we'll arrange to register. Time is short. The UK need the latest lists as soon as possible. Today we're going to be talking about chairing the board, and in particular how to get a better performance from the board from the chair. And we have with us a CEO. Some of you may know him. He is in disguise today with a beard. That's Norman Aquilina at Parsons. We've got a Welsh socialist with us, Tony Mahoney from St. Julian's Advisory. And we also have Sonny Portelli, who's the former chair of HSBC here in Malta and is currently, is it BMIT? How do you say it?
Yeah. BMIT or BMIT, whatever. Yeah.
BMIT. It sounds like something from Star Trek.
Yeah, absolutely. Nearly in that business, in fact. But anyway, yeah, good to be here.
And good to have you. And good to have all of you with us as well. We're going to kick off with something that just lets us slide into this session. And it is actually a very simple question. What makes a good chair and by extension, a well-performing board that delivers better business performance? Sonny.
Okay, thanks for the question. Well, a good chair, to my mind, is somebody who understands that his principal remit is to chair the board and to lead the board, and by no means to run the company. That is the CEO's job. And I think that's the first thing, especially in Malta, that the chair needs to keep uppermost in his mind. He has to lead his board. He has to make sure that the board is properly briefed about what are the items for discussion, having discussed the agenda with each and every one of his members individually prior to the actual meeting. He has to make sure that all the information that is going to be required to contribute to a good debate is available to his fellow directors through short and sharp presentations that would have been prepared through the offices of the CEO. He needs to be a restrained person, non-domineering, and must leave room for others to discuss. A good chairman, in my personal opinion, never takes more than 10 to 15 minutes of the meeting, because his job is to challenge his colleagues in order to encourage them to dig deeper and to ask more pertinent questions. In most presentations, the board is going to have somebody from the executive team or a series of members from the executive team. And in my personal opinion, and this is what I had when I was chairing a very important board that you mentioned, the CEO I used to insist the CEO is always present for the meeting with one exception. That's when the CEO's remuneration is being discussed, and that's for obvious reason. But otherwise, the CEO is running the company on a day-to-day basis. He is executing whatever the board would have decided, all the processes, all the policies, and he has to be really clear in his mind what the board expects, what the board's objectives are. Those are the principal, I think, the principal objectives that a chairman should have in his mind. There are other duties beyond that, and equally the CEO has got to realize that his job is not to make policy, but to execute it and to maintain a good relationship with the chairman through regular discussions, consultations, seeking advice, in order to be able to give the clearest possible advice and leadership to his team. Those, to my mind, are the main hallmarks of a good chairman.
Norman, if Sonny was your board chair, you'd have to live up to quite a list of expectations. Does your chair give you space to execute?
The chair's sorry. Did you ask the question to me or
to Norman?
Oh, apologize.
No, I mean, first of all, although what Sonny did highlight may seem like a tall order, but I think it's fairly legitimate to say that they are the sort of expectations that one would rightly expect, especially those referred to the role of the CEO. The way I see it, and if I can latch on to what Sonny just said, obviously always from a CEO's perspective, I think the first point to underline when we're talking about the roles and responsibilities is that although the roles of both the chair and the CEO differ, but to some extent they also converge. Why? Because there is an important element of needing to complement each other's role, because at the end of the day, they both co-lead the company. So it's a team effort, so it's important that they are both in sync. I think that's the first point to make. In terms of the qualities that Sonny mentioned in terms of what a chair should ideally have, I fully concur. I mean, I would just highlight 3 key points which he's touched upon, and which is obviously the ability to manage a board and ultimately reaching clear and timely decisions. I think that is an obvious one for an effective chair. Of course, understanding the business. Understanding the business not necessarily only from an internal point of view, but also the business environment you operate in, the market you operate in, the competition and all this. And of course, understandably, a good chair needs to also be a good leader and a good communicator. Communicator with the board, communicator via the CEO. So there's a lot of synergies in terms of the relationship of all this. So in my mind, to underline this point, I would say that both the chair and the CEO relationship is critical for effective boardroom performance. And for me, that is a critical consideration. Going specifically into the CEO's role and the supporting role that the CEO has vis-a-vis the board, I think it is critical to highlight that at the end of the day, the CEO needs to ensure that he is constantly informing and updating the board to ensure that the board takes the right and timely decisions based on information that is accurate and correct. But also, one point I would emphasize is the need for any CEO, when presenting the necessary information to the board, does not restrict his presentation to just the numbers. It is important to read beyond the numbers. It is important to communicate to the board beyond the numbers, so that ultimately the board will have a better pulse of the current issues and be obviously better positioned to interpret the numbers. So at the end of the day, this is the way I see the synergies between the chair, who, as Sonny rightly said, takes responsibility of the board and the strategic direction of the company. But ultimately, there is also the CEO who needs to relate to the board and ultimately manage the management team to ensure that what is agreed, what the strategic direction that is taken by the board is actually implemented going down the ranks within the company.
Well, it's interesting that what you said, Norman, about the chair and the CEO roles differing, but also merging, and that both, in a sense, co-lead the business. Tony, is your impression that the chairs and the CEOs are ganging up on other members of the board? Do some Maltese companies have problems with director independence because of the number of family insiders on their boards?
So first, I think, Edwin, I'd say the comments made by Sonny and Norman, I couldn't agree with more, and they make a fantastic checklist for an effective chairman. Do family members gang up on the other members of the board? I think it probably does happen. I mean, personally, I don't see it so much. I mean, for me, the role of the chairman is absolutely as described by Sonny and by Norman. But it's, you know, if I were to add some points, and it's 90% preparation and 10% perspiration. The 90% is all about getting a really good board pack together. It's ensuring that the executive are prepared for the board meeting itself and coming to the board with recommendations that require approval, as well as educating the board. I think also there are a number of other key issues. Things like if you keep pulling up the carrot, you'll never see it grow. So there's too much of a tendency locally to have extremely frequent board meetings. You know, many companies have monthly board meetings. Now, over the course of the month, not that much will happen in a strategic sense. So I will argue strongly it's much better that the board gives the empowerment to the executive to make all of those day-to-day decisions. And yet once every 3 months, the board meets together with the senior executives to discuss the performance of the company and to discuss specifically how well it's doing in relation to the strategy that it's set out. I think it's also important to bring the business and bring the customers almost to the board. So, you know, a good performing board is one that's well informed. And one of the things that we do with the companies I'm involved with is we bring the next tier of management in, almost on a rotational basis, to come in and talk about their part of the business. And the feedback we get from the other board members is that really helps them to understand the business much better. And I've been in businesses where we've actually listened to recordings of customer interviews and so on at the board, just to understand what it is that the customers really think of us and why they think that way. Because there's a tendency to assume, you know, it's all about the implementation not being good and so on, whereas in reality, it's often the very policies the board has created are the things that are actually really kill customer service and staff empowerment. I think also as a board chairman, one of the important roles, particularly I think in Malta, but in many countries, is to actually force a decision. So very often the board would love to have a long debate about a particular issue, but at the end of it, the decision that was normally taken was, let's defer until we have some more information. And I think a good chairman should avoid that. Make sure the information is in hand before the meeting so the decision can be taken. Ask all the right questions. Involve all of the members of the board. Sometimes the family members can be very quiet, Edwin. So my experience is that if you draw them into the conversation more, then they feel more engaged and they actually did deliver some insight that you could never get from outside board members. So I think the family members are the greatest asset to the board that's largely untapped.
In your mind, Tony, do you feel that you have to draw out as a chair from these more reluctant family members because perhaps they feel that the industry knowledge level is stronger in other parts of the board, and therefore they don't feel so confident about putting their ideas or the comments forward?
Yeah, I think 100% true in some cases. I mean, clearly you can't say that you can't paint a broad brush, but I'm certainly involved in boards where family members are relatively quiet. And when you bring them into the discussion, you always learn something you wouldn't have learned otherwise. And it might be about the culture of the business. It might be about the history, what we tried before. It might be about particular projects. But personally, I find that you have to keep reminding yourselves to introduce them into the conversation again. In fact, you have to introduce everyone to the conversation. Because the key issue is that the board should come in, should have some good, hard, solid debates and discussions. They can look to be quite tough at times. They can look to be like a disagreement. But the key issue is that once the board meeting is over, decisions are taken and the whole board walks out as one.
Could we perhaps characterize your comments here that you're an advocate for a learning board, that the board is constantly learning and is an intelligent group sitting within the business culture?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the key issues is to have the right people on the board, have people who have a real thirst for learning and for developing and growing the business. If you have that, then as a chairperson, a part of your role is to expose those people to the information they need to make good decisions. That's why I think bringing the customer into the boardroom and bringing the team into the boardroom are both extremely efficient. You make a much better decision if you understand the business and its people and its clients at the board.
Sonny, not all companies are equal. How does chairing a public interest board or a state-owned enterprise differ from what we've spoken about in these last few minutes? And what's the route to performance there as opposed to the private sector?
Okay, thanks for the question. I hope you realize you've just dropped me in a minefield.
Tread carefully then. Hope you got a spare leg with you.
Yeah. Look, seriously, a listed company is on one planet. A state-owned enterprise is on a different planet, totally. I have experience of both, and I say this with a degree of conviction. A normal company, a listed company, Farsons, HSBC, all our major companies, are extremely well run. They are all regulated because they are listed, so they have to follow the regulations of the stock exchange. They have the FSA that is monitoring everything that they do, and all sorts of regulatory boards. A state-owned enterprise normally doesn't have any of these. A listed company has a board which has been elected by its shareholders, and every year they report to the shareholders, and they don't have the shareholders looking out over their shoulders every day and every week and every month of the year, unlike what happens in a state-owned enterprise. So those are the main differences between a listed company and a state-owned enterprise. Now, how do you achieve results? Was the other part of the question. Well, we have talked how a board motivates the executive team. Tony and Norman have been more than clear about how they see it done, and I agree with everything that they have said. Now you go to a state-owned enterprise, and I think if you're running a board, first of all, most of the time a board is a very broad church coming from very different backgrounds and what have you. Probably some of them will be on their first experience inside a boardroom. And the other problem that you have is that you have just one shareholder, and his expectations change with whichever way the wind is blowing from his particular angle that he's coming from. So it is for the chair of such a company, I think it is really hard work to be able to understand what the shareholders' expectations are, to have foresight, and sometimes it needs to be of the prophetic kind, to be able to understand, what lies ahead, what is the future, 1 month down the road, 6 months down the road, or 1 year down the road. And I think he needs to have very good communication skills, infinite patience, and needs to be very flexible. But as I told you, these are two totally different planets. And I think most of us realize what I'm talking about without getting into the nitty-gritties of the detail.
How big is the gap, Norman, in your view, between the boards of family firms and listed companies? Because you've had experience in both.
Yeah, well, of course, the gap is significant. It has to do, I would say, considering the size, when you're comparing listed companies with family-run businesses, there's obviously considerations of size and scale, which obviously condition the setup of the company. But I think there's also the issue, as Sonny highlighted, in terms of the regulatory requirements. So whereas within a public listed company, you obviously need to adhere with very strict corporate governance and regulatory requirements. In a privately run or a family-owned business, although good corporate governance should apply across the board, but it is to be understood that the regulatory requirements are somewhat of a different level. But I think when you talk about the gap, what I feel should be highlighted is one of the challenges I see is that within family-run businesses, there is the need to not only distinguish and underline the importance of good corporate governance, but also family governance and the distinction of how you manage family governance with corporate governance within family-owned companies. This, I think, is a point that should be highlighted, because at the end of the day, the gap may be significant, although there is a bit of a trend where you do, and highlighting on the points that Tony mentioned, that within privately owned family businesses, there is this trend for independent directors being brought on board, many a time even in the role of chairman, although that may be also there to put in a bit of a balancing role in terms of directors, family members who may have different views, and sometimes therefore the chairman has a reconciliatory role to play. And this I see is happening more and more within family-owned businesses. So the gap can be in various areas, some of which are legal requirements, but others which come out of necessity. This is the way I see it, and this is the way I think I would sum up the gaps that exist today.
Tony, is this gap between family firms and listed companies a chasm or a crack?
The gap is changing actually for two reasons. One is that increasingly the CEOs in the Maltese environment are becoming a little bit younger. Like with many countries, then there's a trend towards younger leaders, but extremely bright, well educated, and understand what corporate governance is all about. In addition to that, the people who understand technology and the impact of technology and so on. So I think there's a shift towards younger, more dynamic CEOs. And then there's something driven by markets as well, that there's a tendency now to look more towards things like the prospects market, which requires a certain level of corporate governance. There's a tendency towards bond issuance. We've seen companies issue bonds recently that could probably not done so in the past. And we will see increasingly the family type businesses starting to go for IPOs. And those all require a level of corporate governance that they haven't required in the past. The concern I have on corporate governance is that actually too much of it can be a really bad thing. So if you walk into a board meeting with a 500-page board pack, which is extremely technical and complicated and required by the regulators, then you end up literally failing to see the wood for the trees. And that makes for very ineffective governance. And I'm sure Sonny will have seen this for sure. I've seen it myself. And so the board has to be careful that it doesn't do the job of the risk committee or the audit committee or any others. Its job is to overview, not to read 500 pages worth of very technical board paper.
Mhm.
Sonny, is the gap as wide as the space between your desk and the wall? How do you interpret this particular issue?
To Tony's point about regulators sort of being all over the boardroom nowadays, and particularly to the point of the board pack, I think the board pack is one of the main responsibilities, to my mind, of the chairman. It is true that as a company gets more complicated and depending on the field of endeavor that the company is in, it could be, yes, a 500-page board pack, which I have never believed that anybody reads, to be quite blunt. So I have always made, from personal experience, I have always made absolutely sure that there are executive summaries to each particular item that is being expanded in the board pack. Plus that the particular department, the CEO or the CFO or the COO, whoever the item on the agenda, on the particular item of the agenda which is under discussion, he must be in the boardroom to sort of explain in as much detail as is possible what he is talking about in his board pack, in his contribution to the board pack, either by presentations. And by the way, a PowerPoint presentation, to my mind, shouldn't be more than 10 or 12 slides, because otherwise it becomes a night at the movies and nobody remembers anything.
Yeah.
So I think this is where the regulations are there. The regulations have got to be observed and adhered to. But there are ways and ways how to adhere to regulations and at the same time come up, because at the end of the day, this is the objective of a board, to come out with good decisions, which the executive can take away and translate into good operations and ultimately deliver good profits. Because if we're not going down that route, then we're wasting our time, we're wasting the shareholders' money and everything. So I think the board pack is critical. The agenda is very critical. a chairman needs to manage how many items are going onto an agenda. And if the items that are being proposed for the agenda really need to be discussed in the boardroom, or can be very well discussed between the management and the CEO through whatever remits they would have obtained at the beginning of the year. So this is where, once again, the chairman's job comes in, managing the board pack, which is critical, to my mind, to good board functioning and to delivering results from the board. And additionally, if I may add, the other one is for the chairman to have serious discussions before the board meeting with individuals, with each individual member of the board, about the agenda and about by the way, the board, the directors should receive the board pack at least 5 working days before the board meeting, and I say at least. If they have seen it, if they have questions about it, if they're wondering about it, in order, the chairman knows the money, the company probably, as good or better than most of them. So he is going to be able to reassure them, to give them a little bit of guidance, explanation, and what have you. This is how boards should function in well-run companies.
So basically, copywriters could be very useful for board chairs in helping to summarize these executive summaries.
The executives should be able to summarize what they are saying themselves. If they can't do it, then there's something very wrong. They should be able to point out the main points, bullet points. This is what we have come to you for, directors. Point A, point B, point C, point D. This is how much money we require. This is the sort of support. This is the sort of manpower that are requesting. Very, very clearly. And then the board pack, the rest of the 50-odd pages backing the executive summary will be the deep dive into why they need 10 people instead of 15 or 15 instead of 10 or what have you. This is what I'm talking about.
It's very much an evidence-based approach, Sonny.
Yep, like everything else. I mean, if you don't have the facts, you cannot come to a decision. I mean,
Tony, you work internationally, and you're speaking to us today from the UK. You've worked in quite a number of different jurisdictions. How do Maltese boards differ from the best performing boards elsewhere? I'm sure our audience will be fascinated to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, it's a bit of a sobering thought, but I worked out last night that I'd been on 25 different countries, so a lot of experience. The truth is that no 2 boards are the same, but there are cultural differences, and some of them are quite funny, really, but true. English boards are all about timekeeping. You start on time, you finish on time, you go through the process. It's all about doing things right, not necessarily about doing the right things. So that's the archetypal English board. Not that close to the business, typically, quite Russian and the former Soviet states, they're extremely interesting because they're governed with a rod of iron by a chairman who's probably the owner of the business as well, has written the minutes before the meeting even begins. And I've had the privilege of a meeting with, for example, President Nazarbayev of Kazakhstan, with Lakshmi Mittal and Oleg Deripaska and so on. And he literally came out and said, gentlemen, minutes of the last meeting approved. Our agenda, item 1 approved, item 2 approved, item 3 approved, item 4, Mr. Mittal, you have a question. And the question was choreographed. And the answer was choreographed, and the meeting finished, and everybody was very happy. Really interesting. In Moscow, typically the authorities are absolutely attuned to everything that you say. They're listening in, and so I think you've got 125,000 listeners in Russia. So President Putin knows exactly what's going on at the board, even though the Italian boards, the food is great. There's no time people whatsoever. But they tend to be very creative, actually, and very productive boards in spite of all that. So maybe we should have more good food and less timekeeping. That's kind of slightly serious as well. You know, that if you're a slave to the clock, it can create some very bad board decisions. The Middle East, the board meeting looks like one long argument in Arabic between the various board members. I learned to just accept the fact that they're having an argument amongst themselves, say nothing until the argument cools down, and then come in as the CEO or as the chairman and actually bring some order to the whole thing. So absolutely fascinating. Malta. So my experiences of Maltese boards, I've been very fortunate to work with very good companies here. But, firstly, very much warm and welcoming people. As I said earlier, largely led by the new generation. So the older generation is passing the baton on to its younger members of the family, and sometimes non-family members. The board packs, with a little bit of work, can become of extremely high quality. So the board packs I get in Malta are as good as anything I've had anywhere worldwide. In terms of the discussion, we have a bit of a tendency to go for the minutiae, for the smaller things. And, I've been in meetings where there have been 3 separate discussions going on at the same time about different items of minutiae. So as a chairperson, it's our job to sort of corral that and make that all work. And you develop the chairman's stare, which is when someone's talking who shouldn't be, then you just look at them and you say, sorry, you have a point to make. And then suddenly they go very, very, very quiet. So to just have one meeting is very helpful. I've also found some fantastic things within Malta, which is whenever there's a contract to look at or similar, one board member always has a cousin who has a business who can fulfill the contract. So there are often some issues about conflicts of interest, which can be quite serious. I mean, it sounds quite funny, but it's serious. How do you ensure that in such a small island, and people are so close to one another, how do you ensure that decisions are made are the best ones for the business, particularly when they may be to actually choose the cousin or the brother or the brother-in-law? So one has to be very careful about assuming something is a conflict of interest. It might just be a genuine interest. I think generally in Malta, people like to have a chairman who will help them to make a decision. They don't particularly want to argue amongst themselves over whether something should be done or should not be done. And they quite like the chairman to say, well, okay, so what I've heard is this, I've heard this. So in summary, I think what I've heard is that we want to do X, Y, Z. Do we all agree that? And if they don't, they'll speak up. But if they do, then we'll have a full house. Occasionally I had to use the chairman's vote as a casting vote, but that's a last resort. And even where it's been used, the board has still decided that even though one member is against, that the actual decision will be taken as one. And when the board walks out of the room, no one's going to say that was a bad choice or that wasn't my choice. They're going to go out and say it was a good choice made by the board with the right information. And I think I'd probably sort of part at that, So a Maltese board, friendly, needs a bit of corralling, excellent packs. In my opinion, make very good decisions. and just have to be careful about that issue of a conflict of interest. What really is a conflict and what's not.
So why are, if the boards are so well run, Tony, why aren't Maltese companies making more money?
I think Malta has a sort of a inherent challenge that we're such a small country that you know, for example, I'm sure if Farsons were in Italy, then they'd have just one core business, and they'd absolutely go for the market as a whole and become best in class at what they do. Whereas because they're in Malta, they have to do soft drinks and have to do all sorts of other ancillary things like properties and property developments. Now, Norman, I'm speaking for you, which I know I shouldn't do. But I think it's one of the challenges of Malta is that a business has to diversify in order to be effective and to grow.
Yeah, if I may just intervene here on this point, I think why are companies not making more money? I think one consideration, although it goes beyond the remit of what we're discussing here today, is the fact that the market is excessively fragmented in many areas. And one development which has made progress in a number of sectors but still needs a lot more to happen is the development of further mergers and acquisitions. You find that this has happened in various markets. In the local market, this has not happened. It could also be tied along with the fact that family businesses are alien to the idea of joining forces with a long-standing competitor. But at the end of the day, I think if we wanted to strengthen the base of companies, the idea of further mergers and acquisitions is a consideration that should be taken seriously.
Well, Tony, this webinar will remain forever in my mind on your definition about how not to run a board meeting. That was absolutely fabulous. Norman, I think we'll stick with you for the time being, because you mentioned in your earlier remarks that there is an increasing familiarity, let's say, by the younger generation when it comes to corporate governance. But you know, in a more general sense, what's your view on the role? How does corporate governance play into board performance today? Well,
in terms of board performance, first of all, I would highlight, you need to keep in mind that when we're talking about governance, as the CEO, I also am particularly sensitive to market governance. So in terms of how the market is regulated, how the market is monitored and enforced. But talking in terms of corporate governance at a company level, I think there isn't too much I can add to what has already been said, except for the fact that having worked within a public listed company, you see not only the necessity of good corporate governance, but the benefits of it. They are beneficial. Yes, at times, as Tony highlighted, sometimes you may end up missing the wood for the trees because certain issues may become a bit too cumbersome. But at the end of the day, once you have a good, well-structured board meeting, when you have presentations which are well presented, when you are adhering to a logical agenda with timely presentations which are detailed but not too detailed, when the level of governance is correct, I think at the end of the day it can only lead to better decisions, more constructive debate, and ultimately one would like to think a better performing company.
I'll just follow on from this better performing company having a direct relationship to corporate governance, because I know it's a passion of Sonny's. Sonny, would you like to expand a little bit on how corporate governance plays into board performance?
Okay. Corporate governance, I think, good corporate governance, I think, is at the basis of good decision making. And it doesn't just dropped from the trees. There are three items which, to my mind, underpin good corporate governance and, before that, good debate. And those are the committees of the board. The audit committee, the nominations committee, and in financial services companies like insurance and banks and quite a few other companies outside this remit, you have the risk committee. Now, each one of these committees is populated by independent directors who look at the audit side of things, who look at the risk side of things, and who look at the nominations and the remuneration, and do most of the spade work for the board, so that when it goes up the board, it is very easy for the board to make decisions, because it's all been looked at very, very intimately by these committees. In most of the listed companies, these committees exist. In companies which are not listed or which are family companies, I don't know in how many of these committees exist, but to my mind, they are critical to ensuring the good governance of the company. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind. Secondly, in the case of listed companies, and I'm convinced that this is what happens in, by and large, most of them, there needs to be very careful choice about the directors of the company, who they are going to be. They are inside the boardroom, around the boardroom table. There needs to be a federation of skills and experiences. People who are coming from different experiences, who have done different things, so that when you sit around the table, they are looking at whatever it is on the agenda from different perspectives. Considering in my experience, I have found that considering the complexities of company law, which is getting ever more complex and ever more onerous, I think there should always be a lawyer well versed in company law, sitting either as a member of the board or present during board debates. And also there needs to be somebody in the boardroom, in my experience, who has actually run a big corporation before in his life, who has been a CEO or has been a very senior manager, so that he can understand the dynamics of a large corporation. We're talking about listed companies, of a large corporation employing a significant number of people and managing or having to answer for a significant budget. So all these experiences around the table make up for good debate and deliver good governance. Don't forget that corporations have to work very closely with banks in order to raise finance. Banks nowadays are looking very, very closely at the quality of the governance that is existing within the company. No governance, I think, is going to be very difficult to raise the sort of finance that you need to run a medium to large size company, whether you're in Malta or whether you're wherever.
I think the legal profession will be indebted to you, Sonny, for the plug that they just got.
They don't need to be indebted. I mean, they have made an excellent living without me plugging for them.
there's a few lawyers,
as my colleagues will confirm.
There's a few lawyers on this call rubbing their hands in glee at this very on the advisory roles that they will be performing in the not too distant future. All seriousness, I think we are starting to run out of time. So we'll return to a critical question, which is, how can boards combine effectively to achieve an outstanding business performance? We've had hints through this conversation. We've got pointers. There are different elements which each of you have isolated. But what is your summary? How can how can boards really combine effectively for great business performance? Tony.
So I think the first thing is to have an absolutely crystal clear strategy and vision for the company. So, I mean, that makes every single day-to-day decision so much easier because it either fits with the strategy, or it doesn't. That's number one. And then I think leading on from that, the board needs to be sufficiently well connected with the company that it can actually assess and consider the performance of the business against that strategy. The CEO needs to be the right caliber, the right person. The senior executives need to be the right people. And one thing that I think a good chairman will do is not just spend time with the CEO, but spend time also with the next tier of executives, ensuring that the whole top team is the right team. It's like if you were a Premier League soccer manager, you'd want to know that it's not just your captain, but the whole of the team is strong enough. And then I think there needs to be a very clear structure within the organization that allows people to make good decisions. And that means having things like an authority matrix where people know what it is that they can decide. You'd be amazed at how many companies have no formal authority matrix at all. Either everything just goes up, or people make the decision that they think that they can. And these are both very dangerous things for different reasons. So for me, the most effective board is one that's very close to its senior execs, where the senior execs can pick up the phone, as has been happening to me over the last 20 minutes, and say, can we talk about a particular project? So I think the chairman is also a very good sounding board, a very good mentor, and a very good coach. I think those to me would be the key issues.
If I may, just to echo what Tony's just said, for me, really, in summary, it's a combination of the board's ability, to clearly articulate a clear strategy with likewise clear objectives. But at the same time, speaking from a CEO's point of view, also the importance for the CEO to drive in that direction, making sure that the set strategy is well implemented, and of course that the company is always heading in the right direction. So that for me is the ultimate combination to be able to perform more effectively.
Tony, I just want to clarify for everyone who is with us what you meant by that the board has to be connected to the company. Can you just clarify that? Because it may have gone past, and I very much appreciate if you can clarify that for us.
Yeah, the easiest way is to go back to my description earlier of the classical English board, where the board members come in, they sit in their board meeting, they do everything to time, and they walk out again. And that's pretty much it. Whereas a good board would actually really have a true understanding of the business. I've taken boards into things like customer focus groups, where they sit there and listen to a batch of customers giving them feedback. You always need to share the voice of the customer, so the market research. And you also need to have the board close enough to the team. A board member who walks in for a board meeting, walks out, gets in the car, and goes home, or goes back to the office is failing in one important thing. When you're at the business, just to spend some time looking around, talking to people, getting to know their names, getting to know what they do, understanding how happy or otherwise they are. You'd be amazed at how much you'll learn from the shop floor stuff as well. So for me, the connectedness is the ability to really understand and work with the business right through from CEO right down to the most junior of people. You're not the boss of the most junior person, but in their eyes, you're somebody who's very important within the company. And so to just give them time is so valuable.
Sonny, what's your take on getting this 5-star performance, this outstanding performance, this game-changing performance? How can you mold people together in order to achieve that?
It's a question for me.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Right. The it is, as Tony has been saying, there isn't sort of, you don't need to go to a business school or whatever to be able to deliver what you have just said. What it is the board, and this is where the chairman's comes in again. The board needs to get to know the management team. The chairman should organize one-to-ones between directors and the individual members of the senior management team. Get to know the chief executive quite well. And there should be the right connectivity that if the chief executive, if the CFO, or if the COO or whoever has a problem, which he thinks he ought to share with a member of the board or several members of the board, he should be able to go to the chairman, and the chairman will facilitate the meeting that is being required. There needs to be this conversation, this dialogue going on, as Tony rightly says, where the executives get to know the board better, and the board gets to know the executives better and how the company is working. To Norman's point, and I agree with him, the board has got to keep in mind that they are not running the company. So they need to give the right mandates to the executive team so that the executive team can make decisions and not run up to the chief executive or run up to the board or whoever. Everybody knows where his remit are, what are the limits of his remits, what he can do. And if he gets to the limits, then to go to whoever who will tell him how far to go or not to go, or take it back up to the board or what have you. And this is how to stop everything going to the top for a decision. You know, that's not good corporate governance. So this is all about teamwork, dialogue, conversation, and above it all, training. The directors should be trained in what the company is doing in order to be able to fine-tune the objectives of the company, or to make sure that the strategy which they have decided upon sometime 6 months back or 1 year back or whenever is still valid today, and that doesn't need fine-tuning or doesn't need revision. And likewise, the team needs to be aware all the time of what their objectives are. If you don't know what your objectives are, you cannot deliver them.
So there we have it. We have had 59 minutes of very clear insights into how to squeeze the last drop from the processes around the corporate governance platforms that are so vital in every business, whether listed or not. I think all of our three panelists have identified the human issues being far more important than the technical ones, although the technical issues remain the substance of every business. We've heard very clearly that the board pack and the board agenda are critical to successfully transfer the decisions within the board to the CEO. And next time around, we will have our last 859 Club event of this year. It's a fascinating one because Tony made the claim that families are the most underutilized asset in boards today. But actually, we've discovered something else, which is even more important than family members, Tony. So we have Dr. Ilona Paroy, who's the Vice President of the Evangelical Alliance in Albania, as one of our panel members next time. We have Charlotte Valeur, who is known to many of you. She's the former chair of the IUD and also currently the chair of Blackstone and a number of other companies. And joining them, Sonny, probably someone that you already know, Caroline Klaas, who's the co-chair, I believe, of the HSBC Foundation and a senior manager there. So they will be discussing what the most underutilized asset is in boards or for boards today. And that will be the last 859 Club webinar of 2020. So that's one for your diaries, everyone. It's Thursday, the 26th of November. And the recording from this webinar will be posted on all the IOD media, social media channels by latest tomorrow. So if you missed something or you want to go back and dip into these words of wisdom, then go to Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn and you'll find the video of today there. So many thanks to Tony Mahoney from St. Julian's Advisory, Norman Aquilina from Parsons, and Sonny Portelli from the Star Trek Beam It. Thank you for your thoughts, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you very much, gents.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Ciao, ciao.
Thanks, everyone.